I'm bullish on Bitcoin because I think it does truly solve the problem. It's held up against all sorts of different macro environments, all sorts of different technical challenges. Um, and there's so much building on it happening, right? They say building happens in bear markets. At this stage of adoption, people do want to have it in their brokerage account. They want to have a slice of Bitcoin in a diversified portfolio. And I think to the extent that there are a handful of different ETFs out there, that's good for them.
In a recent interview, Lynn Alden, the founder of Lynn Alden Investment Strategy, expressed her optimistic view on Bitcoin and highlighted why she finds it particularly appealing for long-term investments. In his tweet, she said, "I don't know what it will do over the next year, but the asset I am most interested in over the next decade remains Bitcoin." According to Lynn Alden, Bitcoin has demonstrated its decentralization by successfully navigating through different challenges and maintaining a significant market share. It is becoming increasingly evident that Bitcoin is a crucial and effective solution. In 2021, a Chainalysis study ranked Vietnam first for crypto adoption, with Asia accounting for half of all crypto users worldwide. Emerging markets including Pakistan, Nigeria, Ukraine, Kenya, and Venezuela also rank among the developing countries with the highest crypto adoption rates. Analytical research provided by K33 Research shows that U.S. trading hours have been the hotbed of Bitcoin's price and trading volume gains. Since the year's start, Bitcoin has seen an impressive 85% surge. This considerable upswing is attributed to the escalating involvement of financial titans, including BlackRock, Fidelity, and Citadel, in Bitcoin. Alden believes that the next bull market will indeed occur. She explains that the presence of an ETF can influence the timing and magnitude of this bull market. Looking ahead, Alden believes that in a few years, it will become widely accepted and considered a sensible decision to include Bitcoin in traditional investment portfolios. We would like to share some highlights from the discussion with you. Before we continue, please remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to receive more updates.
When you look at the total addressable market of Bitcoin, there's obviously a big range. It's hard to say exactly what that market is, but it's not far-fetched to say most entities would want to have some handful percentage of their assets in this portable, finite, self-custodial asset, liquid. Um, and so another bullish thing about it is that in some ways, certain entities can't even adopt it until it gets bigger, right? So when daily trading volume was in the millions, a billionaire would have trouble getting in and out of it without moving the price. There's just not enough liquidity for them to comfortably uh, enter and exit it in size, other than just dabbling. Similar today, there's billions of dollars of liquidity, but $1 trillion pool of capital has to be careful about moving the market, how much they can enter or exit, and things like that. And so I think as you see more and more, I don't like the word regulatory clarity, but it comes up a lot. I mean, basically, once they see, okay, Bitcoin is different than some of the other assets, um, the government's not going to ban it, or it'd be silly if they did. You start to see different pools of capital to say, okay, it's normal to have a non-zero amount in this asset. So 6 years ago, BlackRock called it like an index for money laundering, and now they're filing ETF to hold it, right? So they've done a complete U-turn um, on how they perceive the asset, um, largely due to market demand, ongoing adoption, ongoing education about the space. I think to some extent, it's I I would always like to see, like, I'm always more interested in developing country adoption of Bitcoin
Sure.
more than I am like Wall Street adoption. But to the extent that the network continues to be successful, large pools of capital entering it are inevitable. And they do add liquidity to the overall ecosystem and overall market size. They benefit miners, they benefit users. So it is a positive development, in my opinion. But of course, I'd be more bullish to see a thousand different Fediments pop up, and
Mm,
people around the world custody it in their countries, rather than see these big honeypots form. But I think
totally.
that I'd have to agree with that phrase, like everything's good for Bitcoin. I generally would like phrase it a little bit differently, which is most things are good for Bitcoin, and institutional adoption is one of them. So to the extent that there is a spot ETF, I think that'd be beneficial. Right now, you've had all sorts of entities have had to use inferior products Um, and I think a spot ETF would clean up the market a little bit, at least for American users. Other countries already have, ironically, spot ETFs. It's not really been an issue. So I think we're just seeing another wave of adoption. And I think probably when we look back, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, it'll seem obvious. Like, well, of course, there's of course having a Bitcoin in your portfolio as some slice makes sense, even for kind of like normie finance.
After reports that the SEC found flaws in its initial filing, BlackRock submitted a fresh application for a Bitcoin spot market ETF. If successful, it would be the first Bitcoin spot ETF to win approval. The first leveraged Bitcoin has been permitted by U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. On Tuesday, June 27th, the Volatility Shares 2x Bitcoin strategy and ETF are preparing to launch on the Chicago Board Options Exchange. According to Alden, it's ironic that SEC approved a riskier leveraged Bitcoin futures ETF, but not a spot Bitcoin ETF. She posted a tweet, "The leveraged one is the funniest one." The SEC allowed a leveraged futures Bitcoin ETF and yet talks about investor protection. According to data from CryptoQuant, the Bitcoin held in one Coinbase custody wallet jumped 2,500 Bitcoin soon after BlackRock filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF last week. Lynn Alden holds the view that it is not optimal to have a significant portion of Bitcoin controlled by major entities such as BlackRock and Coinbase.
The next bull market's going to happen regardless of whether or not there's a spot ETF. This kind of thing I think can just influence the timing and the magnitude of it, because it allows potentially new pools of capital to enter that would otherwise, have to enter slower or, in other ways. So in general, I think it would be constructive for price. Um, and as to the odds, I try not to guess these odds. I think we are getting closer. I think that the more iteration you see, especially from these larger entities like BlackRock and Fidelity, it increases the odds, of one eventually being approved, because these filings are not just identical filings from years ago. The SEC always gives their reasons for, why they turn them down. Whether or not they're valid is another story, but they say, okay, here's the reasons why we turned it down. And so then these filings come along and say, okay, we've addressed the reasons that you've turned the other ones down. And then they can say, well, it's still not quite. So they, okay, that's fine. We iterated again. We went and made it even more specific, right? So it's eventually, kind of the SEC gets stuck in a corner where it's like you answered everything they said to do, and they either have to say we don't like Bitcoin, we're not going to approve one, or they just have to, capitulate and start allowing a couple spot Bitcoin ETFs to form. I think one of the funny things is they allowed a leveraged Bitcoin futures ETF, which is clearly a less safe product than a spot Bitcoin ETF. And so it's really hard to be in that environment where you're just always holding back a spot ETF, but you're willing to do a leveraged futures ETF. Um, as for how it's good or bad, I mean, I think, I would not want to see a particularly large percentage of Bitcoin uh, held by, BlackRock and Coinbase and, large entities. Um, Generally, the biggest problem that gold faced is because gold was slow. Gold got centralized and abstracted, and allowed for all sorts of claims to be built on top of it. And those claims were not tested very frequently because most people didn't want to withdraw their gold. They liked having access to the liquidity, of a globally interconnected ledger, for lack of a better word. Um, Whereas with Bitcoin, I think the main thing is that it's really easy to test, um, whether or not someone has the Bitcoin they say they do, making sure there's not a lot of IOUs being built on top of it, um, at least relative to the size of the overall market. And so, I think it's better if people self custody or do collaborative custody or do, local custody, like let's say Fedimints, things like that. There's a spectrum that people can do rather than these big giant honeypots of, like one entity holding millions of people's Bitcoin.
The financial markets are witnessing significant U.S. investor interest in Bitcoin, the leading cryptocurrency by market value. The demand for leveraged Bitcoin longs has significantly increased over the past week as the futures contract premium jumped to 6.4% on July 3rd from 3.2% 1 week prior. Besides reaching the highest level in 18 months, the metric has finally moved to a neutral to bullish area. Is this the time to flip bullish? What is your stance about Len Alden's bullish outlook for Bitcoin? We encourage you to share your views in the comments section. If you found this content informative, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for the most up-to-date news and videos. Thanks for joining us.